Welcome to Crappy Reviews. I'm Chris.
And I'm Rob.
What's up, everybody? Thanks for joining us on this episode of Crappy Reviews. Before we get started, we'd love to hear your feedback about the show. Do you have a topic you think we should cover, or just general ideas to make the show better? Let us know in the comments and reviews. We want to get better and earn your subscription.
Today, we finished fixing up some relics to talk about Silo Season 1. We took some of your feedback about doing an episode-by-episode approach to a show that had been released fully by that point. Chris and I agree that completing the show and discussing the entire season now was the best way to go, so we hope you can enjoy our look back on Season 1 and appreciate the speculation we can bring to the community. Our next episodes will be for a current series that we can watch and keep up to date as the new episodes are released.
To start, this week's acting shout-out is Chinaza Uche for his portrayal of Paul Billings, for his acting during his scenes being affected by the syndrome. You all know Rob and I love to respond and engage with as many comments as we can, so we look forward to hearing all your thoughts and theories in the comments.
All right, Chris, Silo Season 1. How do we feel about the show as a whole? I know we're used to talking about shows episode by episode, but start by breaking down some of your thoughts about the show for me, Chris.
I thought the show was really good. I enjoyed it. I was excited to get to the next episode. I binged it pretty quick after we made the decision to switch from a week-to-week format to just, knocking it out all at once. So I thought it was really good. I'll probably give it a 7.5. And that's, I think, a really good score. I'm going to say, 5 being average. And anything below that being below average, obviously. Anything above that being better. So 10 being perfect. 7.5 is a really good show. I'm excited for season 2.
Yeah, I think for both of us, I give it an 8. I'll throw my ranking out there as well. I think something that you and I have both said a lot of is the acting in this show is very good.
Very good.
I think they did a great job casting. Rebecca Ferguson, who I know as Rose the Hat from Dr. Sleep. You had Detective Marnes, who was the offensive coordinator in Remember the Titans, which made me very excited when I saw it. But just across the board, I think all of the acting did a really strong part of making the show as good as it was. The writing and the pacing was very good. Like I said, I give it an 8. I think, for me, like I told you as well, kind of offline, the one thing I kind of had was I felt like I wasn't connecting with the characters as much as I have in other shows that I really, really like. And that was kind of my only hang up, that, I was invested in the story. I was invested in the mystery. But I personally felt like the characters were more of like the vessels to get us through that story and through the mystery, more so than me being really invested in what Jules was thinking or, how Walk was. I enjoyed a lot of the characters. Don't get me wrong. I loved Walk. I think is it Peter or Patrick, the guy who sold the relics? Loved his character.
Oh, yeah.
He was only in the show for a total of 8 minutes, but I loved his character. But, there was a certain level of kind of disconnect that I felt like I was watching the mystery play out more than the characters. So I think that was my only, I don't even want to say criticism, because it's definitely not a criticism.
Observation.
I still think the characters are very well done. But yeah, it was my only piece that kept it from being like a 9 or a 10 or one of my absolute favorite shows ever.
Yeah, I agree. So I think I connected to most of the characters. I think, as I told you before, it was Juliet who didn't draw me in as much. I think she's a very good actress. I think she did the part really, really well. So it's not that her performance wasn't good. I think it's just the character that was written for her from the book. It just seemed depressing, and I don't know. There was something about her that I think towards the mid to end of the show, I was just kind of like, all right, I want to see a little more of a pick-me-up personality-wise, and I think it was kind of a very flat character the whole way through. She never really had much of an arc. Even at the very end, there were some changes to her character, but it took to episode 10, halfway through, for me to really start to see some stuff, and I kind of just didn't see a large character arc, and I think for Holston and Bernard and just all the other characters, there was a character arc, and I just didn't get one. And since she's the main character and there was so much screen time for her that I was hoping to see a little more of a character arc. I didn't get that, but it was still very well acted for the role she was given and what she did with it. She did a great job. I thought the way it was shot, I thought the special effects, especially inside the silo, the last scene of the show when they show us like the big landscape. It's obviously a TV show and it's not a $400 million blockbuster movie. So there is a quality drop in like a landscape that's not real green screen in the Avengers versus Silo.
But was all of it a green screen anyways?
but I think in general, all of the inside special effects in the Silo and the farm and the whole thing,
I would definitely agree with that. I would definitely agree with that. It did a great job of setting the scene and making it look realistic, because I think, to your point, it could very easily, if it looked too CGI or fake, you're going to get taken out of the show. You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I can tell that they're not really, obviously the silo wasn't built realistically, 150 floors of everything, but it didn't take you out of it by being unrealistic looking. I did want to add one piece. I do think, to your point, Juliet did have a little bit of that arc towards the end, and I think that helped a little bit for me. But I think the way I wanted to put it just was that I was rooting for her to find the answers more than I was rooting for her to find her own answers, right? I think that's what it kind of became for me, where it's like, hey, I'm rooting for her. I like her character. I think she's doing a great job. I want the answers to the mystery, and she just happens to be the one looking for it.
I agree 100%.
So I think that was it. But
yeah,
not to beat a dead horse on that one. I think just I agree. CGI was great. The shot, the way it was shot, very well done for a TV show. I would put it, I think that's one of those things where we always reference Severance. I think that's a show that I would almost compare it to, in terms of like scene setting and doing the shot. So it's definitely going to get high ratings for me on that.
And I'll say this too with my 7.5, and I had mentioned this to you before. I think the way that I viewed the show is affecting my rating. Binging
right, because
a show,
we tend to watch. Yeah, we'll watch it one at a time, give it a little bit of time to sit on it, think about it a little more. I know I watched the last 4 episodes in 2 days.
Yeah,
so
we banged them out, and I think so for me, and I still think that I think the show in general, one of my cons is I think they telegraphed a little bit too much of what the mysteries are, and even if I would have watched it in a week by week setting, I don't think there was a lot of mysteries except for like the big mystery that had gone on for more than a week, maybe 2 episodes at very most before we found out what happened. So there wasn't a whole bunch of water cooler talk going on for the show in between, like across the season, because you find out pretty quickly what's happening. And I think even before they tell us, it's kind of telegraphed pretty strongly about what is going to happen. For some people, they love it. For some people, they prefer a mystery box where it's like a real deep dive. But I feel like, and I always say this, I think Severance is the gold standard for me at this point, because it gives us all the cinematography and acting and all the things we love about Silo, but a little more the deeper mysteries that I really like about From, and it combines into this perfect collage of what I like. And I think Severance is still my gold standard for these kind of shows. But for what Silo is and the way they did it, it was a really good show. I think the way that I watched it probably made it feel even quicker than they intended it to be. And it made it even seem less mysterious for me. But
I think to your point, I have a really good example to that. Was obviously one of the bigger twists in the show was having both Mayor Johns and Deputy Marnes murdered at the end of episodes, let's say, right? And then we had kind of that cliffhanger with the mayor of who killed her. We had our hunches, obviously. Yeah. And then kind of the same thing with Marnes. Marnes was obviously killed by, we assumed by that point, somebody from Judicial, somebody who was working for the silo. And I would say normally we would have at least a week or two, right? You and I, when we're watching episode by episode, it did affect the viewing, like you said, a little bit. Normally, a week or two to think, oh, who could it have been? Yes, we think it's Judicial, but I would say I didn't watch it back to back, so I did have a little bit of time to think about it. And in my head, I was like, oh, did Sims actually do it himself? Right? There was like a little bit of that, because then once you have the aspect of like having blood on your hands specifically, there's that kind of to it. But then we find out in the episode after that it was Doug Trumbull. So to your point, I think we also minimized that, air of speculation around it, because we were able to watch it. Again, like we said, we can watch it in a binging kind of fashion.
I think binging in general, in the Netflix model that happened in the last decade, kind of changed the storytelling of TV shows in general because of how people watch them. So that's part of it. I realize that. And I also know it came from a book, and the book isn't a very long book. So they are constrained to a certain point of just how much more fluff they can put in there. So you have a show like Severance or a show like From, that these are, although pulled from other sources and inspired from, their own universes. So the writers can kind of extend or change or do whatever as it goes on. For Silo, it came from a book, and you can only go too far before you're pretty much not even doing the book anymore. And if the book's short and it didn't give you that many other mysteries, they can't just create new characters and new mysteries just for the sake of doing it. So again, I'm not really knocking the show. I did get a little bit more of a Monster of the Week kind of vibe from it. I feel like I wanted a little more mystery in the mystery box. With that said, it was still a very good show. I'm still very excited for season 2 when it comes out. I'm excited to watch it week by week and analyze it with you like we do the other shows. So yeah, 7.5 for me now is where I'm at, which is well over average. But to your point, for all the things we said, kept me from going much higher than that.
I think if I could put a bow on what we have about ratings and feelings about the show, I think both of us would recommend it to someone. Right?
100%.
I think it's very well acted, very well written, very well shot, very good TV show. It just came down to the personal preference of, I've seen shows where I've seen them do exactly what I like. It might not be what other people like 100% of the time. So to somebody else, this is a 10 out of 10. And I'm never going to knock somebody for that, because it's exactly what you like, and I think it's a very good
It's
show.
all subjective.
So it was just the personal ranking of, hey, there were certain beats here that if they had gone this way, it probably would have been a 10. But very good show. Would definitely recommend. If for some reason you're listening to this and you haven't watched Silo, this is the recommendation to go watch it, because it's first season. You have plenty of time to catch up, as we did. Definitely worth the watch. So in that sense, if you haven't watched it, again, don't know why you're listening to this podcast, because we're just going to spoil the crap out of everything at this point, because we're going to start talking about what we think. We've got our speculation session.
That was deep.
That was a good one. So
that was gruff.
Clearly, there are, as we see at the very end of the season, again, major spoiler warning at this point, tons of other silos clustered around. I'm going to refer to it as our silo. First question, right off the bat. Do you think they are running similarly or the same way to our silo? Do they know there are other silos? Is it all judicial? Is it all the pact, right? Are these mirrors of what we've been seeing in our show?
Yeah, obviously, I don't really know. I have two thoughts on this. One, so there is an overall group that knows what's happening. Okay, or at least there was at one point during the initial design. The founders knew what they were building, and they built them for a purpose. Now, granted, they might have just said, hey, it's too difficult to build a silo that holds, I don't even know how many were on there, 10, 15, whatever. And if we're talking X amount of people, is it 10,000 people and change per silo, 150, 200,000 people? It might just be logistically too difficult to make generators big enough and yada, yada, yada. So they had to compartmentalize it out in order to sustain life in the silos. Or they could all have their own jobs. But from what I'm seeing inside our silo, they seem like self-contained environments. They seem like little anthills. So I think that each of them is pretty much what we're looking at. I don't think they're maybe mirrored, but they're definitely really close to what we're already looking at. But they are connected in the tube or the tunnel that we see on the hard drive in, I think, episode 2 or 1, that we see on the computer, the schematics that come up, and also with the hint to Bernard at the end that there's the big door, et cetera, et cetera. So I think they are connected, maybe in case of complete and total failure of a silo. Like if that generator did fail, they probably could escape at least some of the population or the people they deem important enough to move on to other silos. That could be something. So yeah, I do think that they are essentially the same, and I think it was probably just easier to build them in order to support life like that. They're very particular about the number of people that live there, and I think that they're saying that each silo can hold X amount of people, air-wise and power-wise and et cetera, before we start to overdo it, and that's why they have so many. So I think that, yeah, they built them like that on purpose just because it was the most logistically palpable way to do it.
All right, fun follow-up question. Do you think their silo or our silo was the last one, and that's why the drill is still at the bottom? Or do you think...
No, I think they all have their own drill. I don't know how you would get... Well, they made the comment earlier that it was too big to move, so they just left it.
Right, but this is within their little anthill, to use your analogy there, too.
Right. I mean, it just... Maybe? I mean, I really don't know the answer to that question. I based off what the universe, the silo universe tells us thus far, the drill was left by the founders because it was just too much work to do that. That maybe its capabilities of drilling down were great, but there was nothing for it to grip coming back up, and there was no cranes and mechanisms that were big enough to bring these back up. They were just built to drill and leave, and they knew that when they built them. That's kind of where I'm at, because I'm looking at this just as an engineering problem, that once it's drilled down, how would you drill it back up? There's nothing for it the drills to grip onto, unless like the arms like stuck out like spider climbed back up. I don't know how it would get back up unless you
like
legitimately
Wild West.
Pull it up. You know, like Wild West. I don't know how else you would get it up out of the hole. So I think they were really a one and done deal. They drilled it down, unless they drilled like horizontally and then somehow like covered it up. But I don't think that happened either. So I think basically they made these, they drilled down into them and just kind of left them there.
Gotcha.
and moved
them. Yeah. I think I agree with you that they're very similar. I think my only question is, are they running governmentally? I don't know if that's a word, but I feel like you know where I'm going with that. The same, like, do they all have the pact? I think my assumption is yes. That they're all operating under the same set of rules, and that even though we're a couple generations deep, there hasn't been a shift drastically enough from when the silo was founded, although by the founders. So my assumption is that they're all operating under the same rules and under the pact. But to your point on something you actually mentioned there of them all being connected. And we know the tunnel that we saw in the schematics, George mentions that he found it and in his video on the hard drive that Juliet sees, which then she mentions to Bernard. I think there's kind of a bigger conversation here too, that you we're kind of getting on that path there when we talked about it. So, Bernard now being as he kept phrasing it, oh, God willing, I'll be out of this job in a few months, which I think from the jump, the number of times he said it, I know I told Katie multiple times, he's lying. He's staying in the position, right? It's a little too obvious that he keeps saying, I'm only going to be in this position for 3 months. Oh, God willing. Does he know? How much do you think he knows about the other silos? Because I think the reaction he had to Juliet dropping the knowledge about the door seemed to me like that was news to him. So do you think Bernard is he privy in his position as the former head of IT and now the mayor to information about the other silos? And do you think he just learned about that door as well? Because that's what I think.
Yeah, so I think that he learned about the door when Juliet had mentioned it. That's what I think. Whether or not he knows about the other silos is another question. He may know they exist, just assumes that they can't really reach them. Or maybe the door is not the tunnel. we're assuming that the door is the tunnel, but we don't really know what the door leads to. It's probably a really good bet the door leads to the tunnel that takes you to the next silo and so on and so forth. I find it difficult to believe that the head of IT and now the mayor doesn't know about this. With that said, Sims did not know what he was looking at when they shared the video of the fake cleaning outside. He was unaware.
Right.
And I get the feeling he was also unaware of all the other silos, because when Bernard went back and says she knows and he ran off to turn the server off, he seemed confused about that too. So I get the impression, especially towards the end when Bernard chastised him about you're not, I don't know why I picked you as my shadow, etc., etc. And then towards episode 10 was like, oh, I was a little harsh about that. We should probably talk about you being my shadow. You know, it's all's going to be okay. That Sims is basically just a pawn in the machine, a cog in the machine. He knows a lot about his silo, and he knows about like cameras and whatnot, but he doesn't know much more about why they're in the silo, outside stuff, power consumption, etc., etc. He just knows about keeping peace, keeping order, and he's basically doing what the mayor and the IT department tell them to do. So I think what may have happened here is that there was a founder coalition, Congress, body, parliament, whatever, and maybe they died or things got weird and they just didn't see the same way. Maybe that was part of the rebels. I don't know. It seems as if they're all on their own deal, and they know a little bit, but they don't know too much. And somewhere there would have to be like a founders, I don't want to say like temple, but like a founders building, like a White House for the founders, for them to meet. And maybe that's how they meet. Maybe they go through the tunnels and they all meet and have like an Illuminati meeting and they talk about silo stuff, and that's what they do. I don't know, but it seems like Bernard, if he really is the most omniscient person in the room as far as a silo and that world goes, to not know about the doors to the other silos seems odd.
I think, to me, I guess I agree with that statement, to not know about the ways through. I do believe he knew about the other silos themselves.
I agree.
Even if it wasn't necessarily a connection. Because obviously, something you touched on, why does he turn off the imaging? Why does he run and put his little 18 key in and turn off the server? I think there is an element to him knowing more about the outside than basically anyone else and to what he's letting on. But I do think there is also a point to be made that, you know, like I said, we're generations deep at this point. There could have been things that have slipped through the cracks by this point, right? So those schematics and knowing that tunnel's down there. Obviously, at this point, we think George and Juliet now are the only ones who even know about the door. Well, Juliet, you know, George, R.I.P. George did see the door, according to the video that he left on the hard drive as well. So George was the only one who knew about it. Now Juliet's the only one who knows about it. So through the however long, I mean, decades, right, at this point of time that have passed, those pieces of information have just fallen through the cracks. So I definitely believe that Bernard is aware of the other silos. I remember thinking at first, you know, what the hell does IT have to do with anything? Why does he have so much power? And, you know, in hindsight, after they've talked about it, the idea of IT being the ones that keep everything functioning from the systemic standpoint, right? They're making sure the oxygen machines are working correctly, all the computers are running correctly, that's keeping everything running. So knowing the schematics of the buildings and knowing everything in general does make sense in hindsight to me now with IT. So I can kind of understand why Bernard would have had access to all of that information. And then, especially once he became mayor, he probably at some point or another tried to get his hands on more. And then I also think, I think Sims, to your point, is for the good of the silo, not knowing it's not the only silo. Because if you're if you're of the mindset, because everything you've been told is this is the only silo, yeah, you're going to do everything in your power
right
to do what you think is right for it. And if I know that there's 15 other silos within a distance that Randy Johnson can throw a baseball, I'm not going to be as concerned about the 10,000 people in my silo as much compared to, okay, now there's 150,000 people around instead of this 10,000 or, whatever. Yeah. So
it could also be that they don't want them to know, because the reason that they're in this situation at all is because of overburdening society with too many people. And they, like to your point, we spoke about earlier, they ran the ground dry. We just beat the earth to a pulp,
Right.
and war and this and that. And by keeping people in these silos and keeping just a certain amount of people apart, it alleviates some of the concern for war and this, that. I mean, although they do have like credits and you buy stuff and you work, etc., it's a pretty socialistic society. You kind of just, everyone does their thing and you have your role. So yeah, it's not like a complete socialist utopia, but it's way more than our current society. So it's, each silo kind of has its own deal, and it might be that the founders thought this would be the best way to do that, is to keep everyone in their own little bubble, and you'll care the most about this. And if you're told that it's the only way to do it, you will sacrifice on behalf of your silo, of your country, of your whatever. You will live for that, and that's better than having free will outside, because then capitalism runs rampant, greed runs rampant, and they'll sacrifice the environment and their friends and their family and humanity for the almighty dollar. And that's what happened the first time, and we want to stop that. So let's make sure that we keep everyone in a small enough bubble that won't happen again.
Yeah, so let me actually piggyback off that a little bit, because you mentioned something that we talked about offline, and one of the questions I wanted to talk about on this episode was, obviously we see the surface is just, wiped. We see all these craters. I'm not gonna lie, when they first panned up, I thought they were on the moon. It was just so barren, and I saw the craters until I saw the little hatches or the doors coming out of the silos. So, and then we see the kind of destroyed city in the background, which, real quick, what city do you think it is? If you have to wager a guess.
I don't know.
Just real quick. What city?
California. It's in LA, maybe?
That's a state.
Okay. I know. I'm trying to think of, Los Angeles, so I just get the feeling that it's probably... Okay. New York's so stereotypical.
Because my guess is Atlanta. I don't know why I got the vibe of the Atlanta skyline for some reason. And then, yeah, and actually, now that I'm thinking about it on the spot, the relic that they had that Gloria passed down that ended up with George was sightseeing in Georgia. So I'm going to put my money on Atlanta. I think it's Atlanta. That irrelevant part.
The better question is, do you think people live there?
I
don't. Do you think that there's a Mad Max situation going on there?
I personally don't, just because of the concentration of silos when she went outside. And I just don't see it, because I think where I was going with it too was, like you said, my thought on why they had to be in the silos in the first place was, we've overmined, we've overfarmed, we've overpopulated everything, where we just drained everything of natural resources, that the show in itself almost could, well, in books, I guess at this point, in hindsight, could be kind of a social commentary on, overusing our resources. And it became, hey, we have to do something because we're not going to have food and clean air and things like that if we keep this up. And then the founders then created self-sustaining societies so that humanity could survive.
I agree with that. I mean, I agree because I said it, but the way you're saying it seems like the most plausible answer. And I say that because although the first thought you come with is war and nukes and things like that, being that I don't think the air is poisonous, unless the radiation's gone after X amount of time, there most likely wasn't radiation to begin with. It's just that we might have just screwed things up. More likely, it seems like we, some way or another, like kind of blocked out the sun, because it doesn't look like devastation from war. It just seems like things aren't growing. And it could be that, enough of whatever was pumped into the air over X amount of time just, rain became toxic and the sun made it. So things just aren't growing because of that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's not only the most, I don't want to say realistic answer, but I think it's one that would make sense and then would lead to the necessity and the time, I would say, to be able to build these silos and populate them.
Right.
And on top of it, I think it's a good way to potentially tie in the thought. I know we talked a lot about why is the technology seem outdated, even though we know there's more futuristic technology when you see the farms and the hydroponic plants. And, if they said, hey, we got ahead of our skis with this technology the first time and basically destroyed the planet, we got to tone this back down because that's where we're going to end up again. So I do think from a 3,000 foot view, I think it answers a lot of those questions too. So that's definitely my call on why we're here, if you will, why the outside looks like that, why the silos are there.
So I have another question for you before we jump off to the next topic, kind of related to that. They talk about the founders in a very revered way, cult-like figures in the show, right? And they have a lot of adornments and chains and all these other things, right? Things that are very religious and cult-like in certain parts of their ceremonies and how they wear things, the symbols, all this kind of stuff. Do you think that the founders are still there? It's being passed down to other people, or are we basically dealing with founders set this up and they gave them the rules, and then eventually now they're all on their own. All these silos are just kind of on their own. They don't have a governing body anymore that makes decisions holistically. It kind of just no longer is a thing. Or do you think there is a governing body somewhere that is still kind of directing traffic at a really high level?
No, I think the founders, not to dumb it down, the founders, I think they set everything up. And then once they were gone, the idea was for them to be self-sustained. I think that's the vibe I get, that, they have a mayor in place. They have judicial as kind of almost like the FBI on top of the sheriffs in place. And that the idea was for everything to just handle itself.
So you don't think that Bernard is going to get a phone call from someone saying, hey, you screwed up, she's outside, yada, yada, yada?
I could potentially see him getting some kind of communication from another silo.
But not like an overarching...
But I don't think there's going to be a situation of these people are watching all of the silos.
Got it. Like 5 black shadow figures on a screen in like a spy movie, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, we're not gonna get like the Watcher from Marvel, who's just watching everything and is able to come in and just open up a can of whoop ass when need be.
Because now it begs the question too, since they are independently run, although connected, are we going to see vastly different versions of society? Are they all going to... Because it was clear that the pact was fluid in some areas, and Billings had a very strict way, a very like, this is scripture and there's no other way to look at it, and everyone else sometimes had different ways you can squint and turn your eyes, and some things maybe we're seeing a little bit differently, that we may get different sociological views in each one of these silos, given that they still have to run and function, so you can't stray too far from the pack. But I'd be curious. And this is really far out there. I do not expect this to be a thing, but it'd be really cool if it was. Being that they obviously care about the genetics of the people that they're working with, and these people are in closed environments and things are done a little bit differently, do you think that everyone is going to look exactly the same? Or do you think we're going to see people be a little bit different in each silo because you're smushing them into this ecosystem that's not the same as everywhere else? I'm not saying like nine
So
arms and stuff. I'm just saying, do you think it's going to be different?
I have two answers to that. And the first one is that it's funny you say that because I leaned over to Katie at one point and said, isn't it weird that none of them have the same dialect? Because they've all been living in the same silo through generations and nobody has the same dialect. But I don't think it's going to be, and not for a reason that's script related. And I hate to say this and just sound like a Debbie Downer, but I feel like just because it's a TV show, no, they're not going to look different. I think they're all just going to look like people. It's like when you go to Star Wars. It's like in Star Wars movies when everybody on different planets just looks like a person.
Like, yeah, I don't know if looking different, but do you think that they'll be at all evolutionarily different than another silo because of what they're like? You know,
potentially
they really push this genetic. I think
it's a fun, potentially, but I don't think that anybody's going to come out drastically different, especially if they started them with the same level of technology and kind of the rules of not progressing, if you will.
I agree. Yeah.
The only thing I was going to say was that the pact, you made a good point there, is that I'm under the assumption, I think all of the silos probably started with the same rules, but then
all for sure not the same.
All of them figured out their own DLC later and just kept adding parts to it, right? Like
100%.
Everybody started with the same game, but then we all started making our own characters.
Yeah, there is no way they function sociologically the same way. And I'll even go as far as saying this. If they do, I'm not a fan of the show because it's such a stupid idea that you could lock all these silos together and start them off the same and they all kind of get to the finish line the same way. That is literally impossible. There's no way that could happen. So I'm assuming that when she somehow communicates with other silos or whatever Mad Max like civilizations living out there that's not in a silo or whatever, that we're going to get some different outlooks on how they do things, which is pretty exciting because it expands that world a lot, and I'm really looking forward to it. But I feel like the city will play some sort of a role. I don't think it was just window dressing. I think there's probably a little bit more to it.
So let me kind of take that as a jumping off point too, because I know you clearly think that there's going to be people in the city, somewhere else outside the silo. So that leads me to say that I know you think this, that the outside isn't actually toxic. There's not poison in the air that you can, it's not completely uninhabitable.
I don't think the outside. Yeah, I don't. So I'll be clear. I think the outside is probably not good for your lungs. I think it's not a place you want to like live, and it might with the sun.
You made the comparison of the breathing apparatus with Dune.
Yeah, like I feel like it's not an optimal living experience, but in the same note as like I talked about earlier, where there might be some changes. That we're talking hundreds of years of people living out there. They might be a little better. They have bigger lungs. They might be faster, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? I mean, if you lived out in that environment for a couple hundred years and bred out there, people would not function the same as they do inside the silo, 100%. Sociologically and physically, they're going to be different. So I do think that you can live out there in a way. It just might be I feel like it's going to be one of those things where they see the silo people as privileged, and they're maybe not privileged, that's a bad way to put it. They see them as living under the thumb of the man, and the people out there are living the free life. Kind of like in Judge Dredd, where like Dennis Leary's character under the sewer was like, I eat rat burgers and I don't care because I'm free and I do whatever I want. And up top, it's like really structured and stuff, but you know, things were aesthetically better and people lived better, but they weren't free at all. They couldn't do anything without like oversight. I feel like it's kind of a more sophisticated version of Judge Dredd in a way. So yeah, they probably can live out there. I think there's probably some people out there. I feel like you can live out there and the air is not going to kill you. I'm gonna, you know what, before I go any further, do you think what I said is accurate, and what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm not going to be surprised if you're right. Like I said, I don't personally think that there was going to be people in the city, but if they do show up and, like you said, Mad Max style, I'm definitely not going to be surprised. I do think there are some signs, though, to you being right, especially about it not being toxic and that you could potentially live out there. Um, and that's because one of the weirdest things I noticed, and I'm using this as kind of a context clue for why that's the case. One of the weirdest things I noticed is that when Juliet's screen goes off and she's able to actually see what's in front of her, or what we're assuming is real, um, we don't see Allison and Holston's bodies. We don't see any other bodies around the silo, which we also know should not be the case because we know other people have been sent out to clean besides them. So if I could, I'm going to jump in real quick and just say why I think that it's evidence, and then I'll let you kind of take it yourself because I know you have lots of thoughts on it. But to me, it's saying those people came out here, they did die, and we saw it happen. However, that was due to something else, because my thought is the people who put them in the suits, who kind of do this handling of the cleanings, they go out and they pick the bodies up, and then what we're seeing on the screen later is a recreation and essentially photoshopping those bodies into the shot. So I think I see it as a little bit of proof. I know I'm kind of going a couple steps down the road on that, but to me, that's a little bit of proof that you can go outside at least for a short period of time.
Yeah, I think that you can go outside and okay, I think that the air isn't toxic and the air is not what's killing them. So that's where I'll
So,
start off.
Chris, what is killing them?
There you go. When they go out to clean, they stop in this weird decontamination chamber in between when they go out before the stairs and when they walk out the initial door. I think it's toxic. Whatever mist or gas they're spraying in there, they're expecting it to seep in slowly into the suit because of the poor heat tape. And then it makes the people a little more agreeable when they go out there, which is why they always clean. It's a little bit of a hallucinogenic. They don't notice the kind of obvious VR look that the screen has on them because it looks very, like it looks very video gamey. So they probably don't notice that quite as much. And then they also are kind of agreeable and they clean, they want to tell people, etc. And that's slowly killing him. And the reason I think that is because Bernard, as he's talking to Sims, is like, it's fine. She's going to die in a second anyway, essentially. I'm paraphrasing, but what it is. And then when she doesn't die, he's like, crap. And he jets off to turn the server off. So in the real reason I think that too is because what is the point of the decontamination for someone is going to go out and not come back in? What are you decontaminating? They haven't been contaminated yet because no one ever comes back in.
And I have to call that out because you said that to me very recently after I finished the show, and it didn't even click to me. And I think that is one of the best points I've heard anyone make about the show. So I keep going, but I just wanted to.
Yeah, I was just like, what are they even decontaminating? You'd have to come back in to bring in like the radiation to then do it. So that whole scene is basically them poisoning whoever it is. They go out, they feel a little loopy, and it could even be something that is normally non-toxic to us. Like you go to the dentist and get some laughing gas. But if he just left it on there, or gave you too high of a dose, you could die. So I think they give them, a laughing gassy sort of thing that makes them really susceptible to whatever they want them to do. And then they get X amount of feet out there and they die. And to your point, I had no clue that the bodies weren't there. And I'm usually a lot more observant than that. But you're like, yeah, the bodies aren't even there. So clearly someone's moving them, because I had made the point really early on in our discussions, like episode 1 or 2. And I'm like, for a silo, raw materials are paramount. It's very difficult to make more. You can't just be giving away raw materials. Why would they spend so much time on these suits and stuff? And my wife even said, she goes, how many helmets do they have? Like those seem very, if they are that good of a technology, how could you possibly just keep making them and throwing them in the garbage like that? And they're not. You're right. They go out there, maintenance or whoever it is picks them up. They come in. They might not be giving them like dead people suits, but they're definitely cutting the material back up and reusing the materials in the helmets again and again and again and again. There might be 20 of them, and that's all they'll ever use. Because they're going out and getting the bodies and just reusing them. And to your point, the bodies are probably used in the farm and being fertilizer. So I don't think
I was kind of
really,
comparing the suits. Yeah, I was comparing the resources of the suits just to that point. Like, hey, we're burying our dead in the farm as basically fertilizer to a certain point because we have such limited resources, but we're just going to use all this high-tech material on these suits and just send them out to clean and die. Yeah. And just something wasn't sitting right.
Right. The whole thing is, like I said, those bodies are essentially resources anyway. Just the dead bodies alone are fertilizer, and they're needed inside the silo to keep food growing, and the materials they use to get them out, all that kind of stuff. So, I think that, again, it's not so much you walk out there and like the heat tape was loose and the air got in there and killed them. That's not what happened. Do I think that it's an environment that you could live in forever without any kind of gear? No. Obviously it's not, an inviting environment, but it's not like radiation or whatever that's killing these people. It's that gas that they're pushing into them before they walk out the door that has zero reason to be there. And they knew the heat tape sucked. And that's how it was getting in. And we even said in the beginning, why are they using duct tape to like seal the suit, right? And I know in even today's standards, you'll see duct tape on like hazmat suits because, it does seal things up and tighten them up. But it's pretty obvious that they were allowing them to die either from the outside air or from whatever they were pumping in. But I think like even Holston, when he took his helmet off, it wasn't the air that killed him. It looked like that on the show, but it wasn't the air that killed him. He was already dead from whatever they pumped into his lungs, and he died.
Right. It was too
after
late.
that. And I think that look that he had when he was like, is questionable if he was surprised that he saw his wife or if he saw nothing.
Yeah, one of the biggest things I remember calling out from that scene early on was they keep such a close-up on his face when he takes his helmet off that you never get confirmation of what it looks like in the background. But inside the helmet, when you keep seeing it, you hear all this chirping, you hear the birds, there's all this, you get none of that when he gets his helmet off, and it looked gray behind him. And I remember calling out from the jump, what he saw on there was not real. So I think to your point, and I think we even said it then, whatever is inside beforehand is what's killing him, not with the helmet off. So I think what we've got now is more just clarification of maybe it wasn't in the tank on his backpack, with the seatbelt straps.
It's definitely not the tank in the backpack, because even if they do want these people to die out there, they can't hold their breath that long. You have to give them oxygen to have them walk around and clean and like go through the motions, because it's probably a couple minutes. And the average Joe, especially since none of them can swim and have zero reason to ever hold their breath ever, would not last 3 or 4 minutes holding their breath out there.
Yeah. And actually, I don't want to change topics too drastically and, give anybody whiplash here, but you just said something that jogged my memory on something I wanted to bring up. They don't know how to swim in the silo.
Nope.
Which, makes sense. We see the water at the bottom of the silo. That Juliet did not want to go in. She climbed back up the rope, which, let me call out that real quick, too. That upper body strength she had climbing up and down that rope was just incredible. But
normally I would call that out as being a little silly, but being that she's such a beast in the down low with those wrenches, 100%. You're like, all right, like they really set that up so you're not like, oh, that's ridiculous.
Totally agree. Look at them not leaving plot holes. But she was scared of going in the water, nervous about it. George mentions in the video that they don't have to worry about the water because he found the door and they didn't have to worry about the water. I just wanted to get on the record and say, I believe that is because the water isn't deep enough to need to swim. I think it seems, looking back now, with her trepidation to go in the water and his, in the video, saying, don't have to worry about it, it's definitely probably like waist deep, right? So could just drop in there and be able to walk to the edge and find the door. So I think that's going to be a big point for season 2. I think somebody's going to get in the water and they're going to go, oh, look, I can stand up. And that's how you're going to be able to find the door. I think that was a big, for a show that I know we've talked about not leaving a ton of open ends. That was one that I definitely had stuck in my head that I couldn't let go of.
And I'll tell you what else I think too, and I am gonna do a little bit of whiplash back to what we just talked about the outside. I think that this is not a worldwide issue. I think there's areas that are habitable outside the silos. And to your point on the commentary of what the show is looking to be saying about, overusing resources, climate change, humans kind of being a parasite on the planet, like we did this. I feel like it's probably more specifically major first world nations that are affected by this, and small island nations and areas that didn't really have a lot of the first world resources and pumping things out and over farming and all that are probably not experiencing this. And I say that for two reasons. One, I think it is probably part of the social commentary. And usually in shows like these, even like in zombie movies, there's always like islands where it didn't affect people kind of deal, and they're like safe in certain areas. So I think that's part of my thinking. But the other part of it is, if I'm writing the book or writing the show, the end game has to be to get people out of the silo, or at least alert them to what's actually happening. So once they're out, they can't live there. What do? And you think there must be areas, that are out there that this is not the world. Because what's the point of showing me the book? What's the point of having all these different environments? Why
to
even
let you know
show
they're
it?
Near Atlanta.
I guess. I guess. No, I know. So, I feel like they're showing us all these beautiful things. They show visions of the beach and all this kind of stuff. If it never comes to fruition, it seems, I don't know. It just seemed like a lot of time was spent on the.
It would be kind of a letdown.
I don't want to say not so much a letdown. It's just I think the book could have been like, they could have used another relic or just like a couple pictures to show that the outside used to look like this, instead of this,
maybe
like,
if it was pictures of whatever city it is that's close by there.
Yeah, just something else that was less, and then when they brought over the visions of them on the beach and all these other things and smell the air, and they're very specific about all the feelings that we get now at the beach or in the mountains, and how it attacks your senses in a good way. I feel like if that doesn't exist for them at the end in any way, that I'd be surprised. That's just me. I feel like they're, some people may choose to live there. Some people may choose not, but
I think that's something we haven't talked about before. And I'll be honest, something I haven't really thought about, but I think it's a really good point. I think it's, with TV shows in general, and obviously you and I watch them a little more intently than some people do, and we try and pick up on clues and things like that. So I do think that's one of those things where in a lot of TV shows, you do that with intention, right? You're showing us this specific, they keep going to that beach specifically of, Juliet was looking specifically at the pictures of the beach, and Gloria was seeing the images of the beach and saying, to your point, I wish I knew what it smelled like and sounded like, but it's got to come back around, right? There's got to be a payoff.
There was a lot of time spent on that, and I was reading some thoughts from showrunners talking about how in a 10-episode show you really have to make this matter, and et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of showrunners have said that because in this new format of 10 episodes or 9 or 12 or whatever, you don't have the 22-episode arc where you could just put in some nonsense and it's okay if it doesn't come back around. You have 10 hours to tell the whole story.
Lost.
I didn't even watch. I haven't seen more than a season or two of Lost, so I can't get on the hate or the love bandwagon of the show. But one of these days, when we're not watching something else, I'm gonna watch it.
I still love it, but there's just parts where I'm like, okay, was that necessary? Anyways, sorry, didn't mean to do really.
Anyway, it's just I feel like because of the format of the show and the amount of episodes and what they're working with, to spend that much time on that, and also the fire keepers, the flame keepers.
Yeah, the flame keepers
is another thing that has to come back because they spent enough time on it and gave me enough like flashbacks that it can't possibly be a throwaway. So let me ask you one more question, and then we'll probably wrap it up for today, because I think what you just said triggered a good one for me. Do you think the flame keepers are going to have been strictly within their silo, or do you think this is something that? Do you think Juliet's, now that she's out of this silo, she's going to find other people? I think it's pretty obvious that she'll find other people somehow, but do you think the flame keepers are going to be extended outside of the silo? Is she going to meet other flame keepers? I think that there are other flame keepers in other silos. Whether or not they have flame keepers that are outside the silo, and they like infiltrate silos, or if they like live out there and those are like the rebels, the Mad Max group, and they're on their own thing. Like I said, like we're going to live by our own rules and we're the flame keepers and you guys live under the foot of the man. I don't know. But I do think that each silo has that. And I think that possibly some of the reasons that communications are so limited is for a lot of reasons. And maybe that's part of it, that they don't talk to their silos because of that. Maybe you could talk to them before. Maybe the tunnels were in use and now they're no longer in use because they wanted to shut certain stuff down. They put water. I don't know. I would say that in order to have that be a storyline that's worth our time, you'd have to probably have other flame keepers, even if they're not connected and unified. Again, there's zero chance that other silos don't have their own people that don't want to be in the silo and want to know more. Just people that are innately curious. It's zero chance. They might call themselves something else, but that community exists in each silo for sure. So yeah, I think that they'll be a bigger part of it, and each silo will probably have something. I just don't think they're going to be an outside the silo influence.
I like that answer. I'm just going to go ditto for me on that one, because I think you took a lot of the words out of my mouth on that. So same thoughts, in agreement. So that will do it for this episode. But lastly, we want to leave you with our question of the week. We talked a lot in this episode about Juliet and Bernard and some other characters, but one person we didn't mention much was Robert Sims. What do you think the future has in store for Robert Sims in Season 2? Also, we'd like to let you all know that our next show to start watching is The Changeling, which is dropping on Apple TV September 8th.
To answer the question, leave a review on Spotify, drop a comment under this YouTube video, or find us at Twitter at crappy_reviews and let us know your answers. And while you're there, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to join and grow the Crappy community. Thanks for listening to the Crappy Reviews with Chris and Rob, and we'll catch you on the flippity flop.